The air was thick with tension as the Gornox War Council convened in the grand chamber of Cordith Prime. Towering spires of obsidian gleamed beneath the artificial glow of the planetary defense grid, a display of the Empire's unyielding dominance. Yet within the room, an unshakable unease crept like a shadow, stirred by the presence of one alien, General Tassark. The aged veteran stood apart from the rest, his pale blue scales dulled with time and etched with scars of battles long past. His once vibrant crest now drooped, a testament to the weight of years and memories that refused to fade. He was a relic, respected yet largely ignored by the younger, more ambitious commanders who saw him as a cautionary tale rather than a source of wisdom. "Speak your piece, General," Commander Varn barked, his tone brimming with impatience. Varn was everything Tassark was not, young, brash, and hungry for glory. His crimson armor gleamed as he leaned forward, his fiery eyes daring the old general to challenge his authority. "We haven't all day." Tassark's gaze swept the room, pausing briefly on Lieutenant Arden, a junior officer whose subdued demeanor contrasted with the arrogance that filled the chamber. Arden shifted uncomfortably under the scrutiny, but said nothing. Tassark took a deep breath. "You believe humans are weak," he began, his voice low but firm. "You believe they are a species of chaos, incapable of discipline or unity. That belief will be your undoing." Snickers rippled through the assembly. Varn leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "This again? Your obsession with humans is starting to border on pathetic. They are nothing more than a nuisance, an annoyance to be swatted aside. You think this because you have not faced them," Tassark replied, his tone unyielding. "You see their technology and laugh at its inferiority. You witness their disorganized fleets and assume they lack strategy. But you do not see their resolve, their ingenuity, their capacity to endure." Varn rolled his eyes. Enough with the melodrama. If humans were truly a threat, we would have seen it by now. Tassark's expression darkened. "You saw it 3 cycles ago. You just refused to acknowledge it." The chamber fell silent. Varn's smirk faltered, and Arden glanced at Tassark with renewed interest. The general continued, his voice taking on a haunted quality. "I was there at Daryan 5, he said. "We thought we were invincible. Our fleet, a shining armada of unstoppable power. The humans were nothing more than an afterthought. We descended upon their colony, expecting a swift victory. What we encountered instead was something I will never forget." Tassark's claws tapped against the edge of the table, the sound echoing like distant gunfire. "They fought with desperation, yes, but also with cunning. They exploited every weakness, every oversight. When their weapons failed, they turned their own machinery into bombs. When we surrounded them, they burrowed into the ground and set traps that turned our numbers against us. It wasn't just strategy. It was survival distilled into something pure and terrifying." Varn scoffed, though his bravado seemed forced. "And yet, here you stand, a survivor of their so-called wrath. If they were as dangerous as you claim, you wouldn't be here to tell your tale." "I survived because they allowed me to," Tassark said coldly. "I watched as they dismantled our fleet piece by piece, not out of cruelty, but precision. They spared those they deemed non-combatants, even as they slaughtered the rest. And when they had won, they left a single ship intact, mine. They sent me back with a message. Do not come again." The room was deathly quiet now. Even Varn seemed unsettled, though he masked it with a dismissive wave. "A convenient story, General. But we are not the fleet of Daryan 5. We are the Gornox Empire, the most powerful force in the galaxy. Whatever ragtag tactics the humans employed against you will not work against us." Tassark shook his head, his voice tinged with sorrow. "Power means nothing to them. They fight not for conquest or resources, but for survival. And those who fight for survival do not fight fair." Arden leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "General, if what you say is true, then why not propose diplomacy? Surely, there must be a way to avoid conflict." Tassark's gaze softened. "I have tried. They do not trust us, and why should they? We have given them no reason to believe in our goodwill. The humans have seen only our aggression, our arrogance. They will not negotiate from a position of weakness. Varn slammed his fist on the table, breaking the spell of Tassark's words. Enough of this defeatist drivel. The Council has decided, and the invasion will proceed as planned. Humans are an obstacle to our expansion, and obstacles are meant to be destroyed. Tassark's shoulders sagged, but his eyes burned with defiance. You are making a grave mistake, Commander. One that will cost us dearly. Varn sneered. We shall see, old man. Perhaps you've simply grown too soft to understand what it takes to win a war. The assembly began to disperse, the hum of dissent fading as officers filed out of the chamber. Arden lingered, his eyes fixed on Tassark. General, he said quietly, do you truly believe we cannot win? Tassark met his gaze, his voice heavy with conviction. Winning is not the question, Lieutenant. The question is whether we can survive what comes next. Arden nodded slowly, a flicker of doubt crossing his features. Without another word, he turned and left, leaving Tassark alone in the empty chamber. The old general closed his eyes, the memories of Daryan, 5 surging to the surface. He could still hear the screams, still feel the heat of the fires that consumed his comrades. As the door hissed shut behind him, Tassark whispered to himself, I warned them. May the gods have mercy, for the humans will not. The human colony of New Horizon had always been a beacon of progress, its domed cities glinting under the pale light of twin suns. But now, the air was thick with smoke, and the ground trembled with the echoes of destruction. The Gornok's assault was swift and merciless. Towers collapsed into rubble, shuttles exploded mid-flight, and the screams of the fleeing population were drowned out by the unrelenting roar of alien weaponry. Commander Varn observed the devastation from his command vessel, a cruel smile playing across his face. Let this be a lesson to them, he muttered, his voice dripping with contempt. Behind him, Lieutenant Arden stood in uneasy silence, his gaze fixed on the burning planet below. The weight of the old general's warnings lingered in his mind, but he said nothing. At the colony's edge, amidst the chaos, a lone communications officer staggered through the wreckage, his uniform scorched and torn. With trembling hands, he activated a battered transmitter. The message he sent was simple yet dire. New Horizon has fallen. This is not an evacuation request. It is a warning. Light years away, aboard the UN Death, the distress call crackled through the bridge. Captain Marcus Johnson stood motionless as he listened, his angular features hardening with every word. A veteran of countless battles, Johnson was a man of quiet intensity, his steel-gray eyes betraying little emotion. But those who knew him understood that behind his stoic demeanor lay a mind as sharp as the edge of a blade. New Horizon, he said finally, his voice low but firm. How long until we lost contact? For minutes, sir, replied Ensign Carter, his hands trembling as he reviewed the report. No further transmission since. Johnson nodded, his jaw tightening. He turned to the ship's tactical officer, Commander Owen Price. What's our closest fleet presence? Price shook his head grimly. Closest reinforcement is a Valor group 6 days out. We're on our own. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the steady hum of the ship's systems. Finally, Johnson straightened, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Then we'll show them what it means to provoke humanity. The bridge erupted into controlled chaos as orders were issued and systems brought online. Johnson moved with precision, his presence a calming force amidst the urgency. He paused briefly at the science console, where Dr. Heath Mercer was already analyzing the preliminary data from the attack. Mercer was an unassuming figure, his wiry frame and perpetually distracted air hiding a mind that had outwitted some of the galaxy's most dangerous threats. They hit the colony hard, Mercer said, his voice tinged with anger. No pattern to their strikes. This wasn't a tactical operation. It was a slaughter. They're testing us, Johnson replied, Try to see how far they can push before we push back. Mercer's lips tightened. They're about to find out. Within hours, the Death emerged from hyperspace near the remnants of New Horizon. The sight was a sobering one. The once thriving colony was now a graveyard of twisted metal and scorched earth. The ship's sensors picked up no signs of life. The Gornox fleet had moved on, leaving only devastation in its wake. Johnson stood at the observation deck, his hands clasped behind his back. "They think this will break us," he said softly. "But they've underestimated what we're capable of." "What's the plan, sir?" Price asked, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. Johnson turned, his expression unreadable. "We make them pay." The retaliation began with precision strikes on Gornox supply routes. Small, agile human ships slipped past enemy defenses, delivering devastating blows to key outposts and transports. The Gornox, accustomed to overwhelming their enemies with brute force, found themselves outmaneuvered at every turn. Each strike was calculated, leaving no room for retaliation. At the heart of these operations was Johnson, directing his forces with the precision of a master strategist. He anticipated the Gornox's every move, exploiting their overconfidence and rigid tactics. Mercer provided critical support, his insights into alien technology enabling the humans to disrupt the Gornox communication networks and cripple their logistical chains. Word of humanity's response spread quickly. Among the Gornox forces, fear began to take root. Stories of human ships appearing out of nowhere, striking with surgical precision before vanishing into the void, spread like wildfire. Even Varn, who had dismissed humanity as insignificant, began to feel the pressure. He issued orders for a counteroffensive, but his commanders hesitated, their confidence shaken. Back aboard the Death, Johnson and Mercer pored over the latest intelligence. "They're regrouping," Mercer said, pointing to a cluster of enemy ships on the holographic map. "Looks like they're planning a large-scale offensive." "Let them come," Johnson replied. "We'll be ready." As the humans prepared for the next phase of their campaign, tensions among the Gornox command continued to grow. Arden, who had been silently observing the unfolding disaster, finally spoke up. "Commander," he said cautiously, "perhaps it's time we reevaluate our strategy. The humans are not the easy target we assumed." Varn's eyes narrowed. "Are you suggesting we retreat?" "I'm suggesting we consider the possibility that General Tassark was right," Arden replied. "This isn't a war we can win through sheer force." Varn's response was a harsh laugh. "You sound like the old fool himself. We are the Gornox Empire. We do not retreat. We do not cower before lesser beings." "Then what do we do?" Arden asked, his voice rising. "Wait until they dismantle us piece by piece." Varn glared at him, but said nothing. The silence that followed was more damning than any argument. On the other side of the conflict, Johnson stood in the dimly lit war room, his gaze fixed on the tactical display. He could feel the weight of every decision pressing down on him, but he refused to falter. Humanity's survival depended on him, and he would not let them down. Mercer approached, his expression grim. "The Gornox will escalate. They won't take these losses lying down." "I'm counting on it," Johnson said, his tone cold. "Let them come to us. We'll make this their last mistake." As the Death prepared for the inevitable confrontation, the air aboard the ship was charged with a mix of determination and quiet anticipation. The crew knew the odds, but they also knew what was at stake. They would not back down. They would not surrender. In the vast darkness of space, the first glimmers of the Gornox fleet began to appear. Johnson watched them with steely resolve, his voice calm as he issued his final orders. "This is where we make our stand. This is where they learn what it means to fight humanity." The Gornox fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, a display of overwhelming might that would have broken the spirit of any lesser opponent. Thousands of ships, their hulls gleaming like obsidian blades, cast a shadow over the vast expanse of space. Commander Varn stood at the bridge of the flagship, his gaze locked on the holographic display of their target. humanity's primary defense fleet. "This is where it ends," he declared, his voice a blend of confidence and fury. "No more skirmishes, no more games. We will crush them here and now." Lieutenant Arden stood silently at his side, watching the fleet's slow advance toward the human positions. There was no denying the sheer power of their forces, yet a knot of unease tightened in his chest. The humans had proven resourceful, unpredictable. Their silence now was unnerving. On the other side of the conflict, aboard the UN Death, Captain Marcus Johnson observed the Gornox fleet with a calculating stare. The enemy's formation was flawless, their strength undeniable, but he saw it for what it was, a rigid system begging to be exploited. Beside him, Dr. Heath Mercer studied the enemy's movements with the intensity of a man searching for cracks in an impenetrable wall. "They're committing everything," Mercer remarked, his voice carrying a mixture of admiration and disdain. "Arrogant bastards think sheer numbers will win this." Johnson nodded, his expression unreadable. "They've yet to learn. Let's teach them." The humans' first move came not from their ships, but through the digital ether. Mercer's team, a group of cyber warfare specialists working tirelessly in the background, launched a series of precision strikes against the Gornox fleet systems. Communications faltered, targeting arrays glitched, and a cascade of false alarms spread confusion through their ranks. On the Gornox flagship, Varn slammed a clawed hand against the console. "What is happening?" he roared, as technicians scrambled to restore order. "It's interference," Arden said, his voice tight. "They're disrupting our systems." "Then adapt," Varn snapped. "Push forward. Overwhelm them with firepower." But the humans didn't wait for the Gornox to recover. Small, agile strike teams emerged from the shadows of asteroid fields and debris clusters, hitting the fleet's supply ships and support vessels with ruthless efficiency. The Gornox, accustomed to head-on battles, found themselves blindsided by the guerrilla tactics. Every engagement left them bleeding resources and morale. Arden, watching the chaos unfold, turned to Varn. "We need to regroup. This isn't a fight we're prepared for." Varn's fiery eyes burned with indignation. "You sound like Tassark, weak, defeatist. We do not retreat." "This is a retreat," Arden argued. "It's survival. They're picking us apart." Varn ignored him, barking orders for an all-out assault. The fleet pushed forward, but their cohesion was already fraying. As the humans struck with relentless precision, the Gornox's losses mounted. On the Death, Johnson orchestrated the battle with the precision of a master conductor. His calm directives cut through the chaos, turning every engagement into a calculated victory. Mercer, ever the pragmatist, marveled at the captain's ability to anticipate the Gornox's moves. "They're folding faster than I expected," Mercer remarked, his tone tinged with satisfaction. "They're predictable," Johnson replied. "That's their weakness. They rely on brute force, and when that fails, they don't know what to do." As the battle raged on, the Gornox fleet's morale crumbled. Reports of human infiltrators sabotaging key systems spread panic. Ships vanished without a trace, their crews taken out in surgical strikes. Fear, an emotion foreign to the Gornox, began to take hold. Amidst the chaos, General Tassark, who had been relegated to a minor advisory role, watched the unfolding disaster from a secondary command station. His scaled hands trembled as he saw his people's might unravel before his eyes. Turning to a junior officer, he spoke with urgency. "Send word to Arden. If Varn won't listen, perhaps he will." Arden received Tassark's message during a brief lull in the fighting. The old general's words were simple, but laced with the weight of his experience. "Withdraw while you still can. Pride will not save you." For the first time, Arden truly understood the depth of humanity's resolve. They weren't just fighting a war. They were dismantling an empire. But convincing Varn of this truth seemed impossible. On the flagship, Varn stood alone at the center of the bridge, his rage boiling over as reports of defeat continued to flood in. He refused to see reason, his pride blinding him to the reality of their situation. When Arden approached him with Tassark's plea, Varn erupted in fury. "You think I'll surrender?" To them he spat. "I would rather die." "Then you'll doom us all," Arden replied, his voice steady despite the tension. "This isn't about pride, Commander. It's about survival." But Varn would not hear it. He issued an order to rally the remaining fleet for one final, desperate offensive. Arden, torn between his duty and his growing doubt, could do nothing but watch as the Gornoks marched toward their doom. The humans, however, were ready. Johnson had anticipated the move and set a trap. The Gornoks fleet, battered and disorganized, walked straight into an ambush. Human ships encircled them, cutting off their escape routes and raining fire from all sides. On the bridge of the death, Johnson gave the order to deliver the final blow. "End this," he said simply, his voice devoid of triumph. The battle ended not with a climactic explosion, but with a quiet, devastating realization. The Gornoks fleet was broken. Their flagship, once a symbol of their invincibility, drifted in silence, its systems disabled. As the wreckage of the battle settled, Johnson turned to Mercer. "Send a message to the survivors. They have one chance to surrender." Mercer nodded, his expression grim. "And if they don't," Johnson's gaze was as cold as the void, "then they'll leave us no choice." The Gornoks, for all their strength, had been brought to their knees. Yet Johnson knew the fight was far from over. Humanity had won this battle, but the war was only beginning. The question now was whether the Gornoks would accept defeat, or if their pride would drive them to extinction. The bridge of the UN death was silent, save for the hum of the ship's systems and the faint, tense breathing of its crew. Captain Marcus Johnson stood at the center, his gaze locked on the holographic display before him. The remnants of the Gornoks fleet, scattered and weakened, had retreated to a nearby system. But Johnson knew this wasn't over. Not yet. "They're regrouping," Dr. Heath Mercer said, breaking the silence. He tapped a few commands into his console, bringing up a detailed analysis of the enemy's movements. What's left of their fleet is consolidating around a massive energy signature. Looks like a planetary defense platform. Johnson studied the data, his sharp eyes narrowing. "A last stand," he murmured. "They're fortifying their position, hoping to turn the tide." Commander Owen Price, his tactical officer, stepped forward. "If they're dug in, it'll be a bloodbath. We've won the upper hand. We could pull back, regroup." "No," Johnson interrupted, his tone firm but not harsh. "If we give them time, they'll rebuild. This isn't just about winning a battle. It's about ensuring they never pose a threat again." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. They knew the cost of what Johnson was proposing, but they also knew his resolve. He wasn't a man who made decisions lightly. "Prepare the fleet," Johnson ordered. "We move in 5 hours." As the crew sprang into action, Johnson retreated to his quarters. He sat at his desk, staring at the small holographic photograph of his family, a wife and daughter he hadn't seen in years. He ran a hand over his face, the weight of command pressing down on him. But there was no room for hesitation. Too many lives depended on him. When the fleet arrived in the Gornok system, the sight that greeted them was daunting. The enemy had established a defensive perimeter around a massive, heavily fortified planet. Orbital platforms, bristling with weaponry, surrounded the world, their cannons trained on the approaching human ships. "Impressive," Mercer admitted as he analyzed the defenses. "But it's all or nothing for them. If we break through this, they're finished." Johnson nodded. "Begin the assault." The first wave of human ships moved into position, their sleek designs cutting through the void. The Gornoks opened fire immediately, filling the space with beams of destructive energy and waves of missile barges. Explosions lit up the darkness, and the human fleet responded in kind. On the Gornok's flagship, Commander Varn barked orders, his voice raw with fury. "Hold the line! Do not let them breach the defenses." Lieutenant Arden stood nearby, his expression grim. He had tried one last time to reason with Varn before the battle began, but his pleas had fallen on deaf ears. Now, as he watched the carnage unfold, He couldn't shake the feeling that this was a war they were destined to lose. The Def led the charge, its advanced shielding absorbing the brunt of the enemy's fire. Johnson coordinated the attack with surgical precision, directing squadrons to exploit weak points in the Gornok's defenses. Mercer's expertise proved invaluable as he identified vulnerabilities in the orbital platforms, allowing human bombers to deliver devastating strikes. Despite their losses, the humans pressed forward, their determination unyielding. Each victory, no matter how small, brought them closer to the planet. But the Gornoks fought with the desperation of a cornered predator, their resistance growing fiercer with every inch the humans gained. As the battle raged, Johnson received an urgent message from Mercer. "Captain, I've detected an anomaly in the planetary defenses. There's a central control hub buried beneath the surface. If we can take it out, the entire system will collapse." Johnson's mind raced. It was a risky move, but it could end the battle in one decisive stroke. "Prep a strike team," he ordered. "I'll lead it myself." Price stepped forward, his voice edged with concern. "Sir, with all due respect, you're too valuable to risk on a ground assault." "I trust you to handle the fleet," Johnson replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. "This is something I need to do." The strike team, composed of the best soldiers humanity had to offer, boarded a sleek dropship and descended toward the planet. Anti-aircraft fire lit up the sky as they weaved through the chaos, narrowly avoiding destruction. When they finally touched down, the team moved with practiced efficiency, pushing toward the control hub through a maze of fortified defenses. The ground battle was brutal. Gornok soldiers, towering and heavily armored, fought with feral intensity. But the humans, smaller and more agile, used their superior tactics and technology to gain the upper hand. Johnson led the charge, his rifle a blur of precision shots. His presence was a rallying point for the team, his calm under fire inspiring those around him. As they reached the entrance to the control hub, Mercer's voice came through the comms. "You've got limited time, Captain. They're redirecting reinforcements to your position." "Understood," Johnson replied. "We'll make it quick." Inside, the control hub was a labyrinth of alien machinery. The team moved cautiously, aware of the slightest movement. Finally, they reached the central chamber, where a massive core pulsed with energy. "This is it," Johnson said, planning the charges with the help of a demolitions expert. "Cover me." Before they could finish, a group of Gornok soldiers burst into the chamber, weapons blazing. The room erupted into chaos as the two sides clashed. Johnson fought with relentless precision, his every move a calculated strike. Despite their numbers, the Gornoks began to falter under the human assault. The charges were set, their timers ticking down. "We're done here," Johnson called out. "Fall back." The team retreated under heavy fire, making their way back to the dropship. The charges detonated as they lifted off, sending a massive shockwave through the planet's defenses. Orbital platforms flickered and went dark, their weapons falling silent. On the Def, Price watched as the Gornok's fleet descended into chaos. "The defenses are down," he reported. "They're exposed." Johnson's voice came through the comms. "Finish it." The human fleet surged forward, overwhelming the disoriented Gornok's forces. One by one, their ships were destroyed or forced to surrender. The battle was over. Back aboard the Def, Johnson stood in the war room, his face drawn but deaf. He knew the cost of their victory, the lives lost and the sacrifices made. But he also knew it was necessary. "We've won the battle," Mercer said, joining him. "But this war isn't over." "No," Johnson agreed. "But they'll think twice before crossing humanity again." As the wreckage of the Gornok's fleet drifted in the void, a message was sent to their surviving leaders: surrender or face extinction. It was a message backed not by arrogance, but by the unyielding resolve of a species that had been pushed too far.